All right, Shellan. Well, thank you for joining us today to talk about your path in working in affordable housing and why you do it, how we can get more housing built in our state. And you also serve on the Gem State Housing Alliance board, so thank you for that. But yeah, I first, maybe just tell folks that don't know you a little bit about what you do for your day job. Folks think of the word developer, and it's sometimes a bad word.
Yeah.
Sometimes just people don't really know what it is. So maybe you can just talk about, what you do.
Yeah, sure. Well, first, thanks for having me. And I'm just ecstatic to be part of the Gem State Alliance. I think it's a critical piece that the state of Idaho has been missing. So I look forward to small successes as we move forward and then larger ones in time. So I'm Shellan Rodriguez with SMR Development. I own and run a small, these days a boutique development firm, which take that for what it's worth. But really what I focus on is workforce and affordable housing. And I will do anything from my own developments, typically multifamily and typically new construction, to partnering with larger developers all over the region. I have a bit of background in states around us as well, including Montana and primarily California, but doing multifamily development in joint ventures or joint partnerships with other developers, and then doing consulting with oftentimes, sometimes it's like governmental jurisdictions and agencies, sometimes it's community foundations, but doing work with them to identify their priorities when it comes to housing and helping to shape policy around creating more housing that meets their priorities, whether it's affordability, workforce, missing middle, sustainability, just trying to create policies that help them meet those goals.
And how did you, it's such a complex job. There's so many aspects to it, especially in the affordable housing space and all the challenges that you have to navigate. How did you get into this line of work?
Yeah, it's a great question because I've been doing it for 25 years now. It always makes me feel super old when I say that, but I got into affordable housing when people really didn't. That wasn't a thing. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a phrase that people understood. And it's been really interesting the last five or 6 years, where it's become something that everybody has an idea of. It's still not. I still don't think it's super definable in the big picture for every layperson to have the same definition. But I got into it really knowing I did a lot of nonprofit work and community organizing in Montana, and I ended up working for a housing authority up there, which is like a quasi-government agency. And we were it was just a very unique time when that housing authority was able to leverage the sales of some of their public housing to create more housing using different sources of funds. And at the time, it was transitional housing for families. It was senior housing using old Section 202 grants. Like it was some of these old grants and sources of funds that really don't exist anymore, but low-income housing tax credit program. So I saw very quickly how you could leverage the sale of 40 units, 40 homes, to create hundreds of homes. That was in western Montana. So I got into that and I just loved it. I stayed in it. It made me, I can sleep well at night. And I just think it's really important work. And it's gotten harder in a lot of ways, but it is exciting that it's part of the, it's part of the discussion in a way that I haven't seen really throughout my career.
And when you say affordable housing, in Idaho, we don't say affordable housing.
Right.
Although some people say it, they mean housing's just not affordable. We can't afford, most Idahoans can't afford their housing. They're paying over half of their income towards their rent or their mortgage now, especially young folks that are having to try to buy their first home for $500,000. Renters that are paying, $2,000 towards their rent. So sometimes when you talk about affordable, it's just like Idahoans right now can't afford their home. We're considered the second least affordable market in the U.S. now, according to the National Realtors. But there's also the technical term affordable housing. Can you kind of describe more what that means and when you're talking about affordable from your...
Sure. Well, two things. So first of all, affordable housing is for everyone, meaning that whether you're a millionaire or you're just trying to, make ends meet, affordable housing, the government has said 30% of your income should go towards housing. And that ratio of 30% of your income going towards housing allows you to have additional income for all the other things you need. Second highest portion of your income is transportation, depending on whether or not you have major medical. So between housing, transportation, medical, those are like where people's incomes go. And then you need food and daycare and all the other things. But if you're paying, in theory, if you're paying 30% of your income, gross income, towards housing, you're in an affordable housing situation. So that's a lowercase a affordable housing that all Idahoans need, right, in order to thrive or even succeed in any manner. And then what I often work on is I think what you mean, the technical capital A affordable housing, which is when units, apartments, or homes are restricted to certain incomes. And there's a lot of programs out there. The Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program is a program that was created in the 1980s under the Reagan administration, and it's not part of HUD. It's part of the tax code, and it basically incentivizes entities that have a big tax burden. So I'm talking, Google's, Amazon's, Boston Capital, like big firms in the industry that are in any industry, I should say, that have tax burden that want to invest cents on the dollar towards affordable housing, serving households making 80% of the area median income and below. It focuses on 60% of the area median income, but units can go up to 80%. Every county has different area median incomes. So it gets like real uninteresting real fast in the sense of you're talking 30% AMI, 60% AMI, 80% AMI. But the housing that I work on generally serves folks around 60% of the area median income and oftentimes is restricted to serve those folks and has subsidy, whether it's in the low income housing tax credit equity or perhaps lower interest loans or perhaps other types of local or state funds that can help create it. And that's simply because folks making 60% and 80% AMI cannot afford a situation where only 30% of their income is going towards rent or mortgage.
Right. And
Does that help?
Yeah, it does, I think. Yeah.
Clear as mud?
Well, some people too now are even calling the capital A affordable workforce housing too, because it is our generally workforce people
100%.
that are
It
living
is
and
workforce.
working here. But if you say affordable, sometimes people are immediately like, oh no. Yeah. So.
Well, yeah. And when I first started in the industry, when I would say, oh, I work on affordable housing, people would think I was doing homeless shelters. And sure, homeless shelters are a piece of the puzzle, but it's not necessarily what I do at all.
No.
And so really I'm building, just sorry to backtrack a little bit. I mean, folks making 30% of the AMI are very poor. They are sometimes working. Oftentimes they're just living on Social Security or disability. But again, the units that I'm generally serving are averaging about 60% up to 80%. So there's plenty of folks that are taking care of our children, cleaning our, buildings, janitor, and servers and retail and even medical folks that are working in the hospital. It is very much the working poor.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that's, just a myth we got to work on in Idaho and helping folks understand what we talk about when we say affordable.
Yeah.
I say, workforce or attainable housing too, because that just helps open the conversation more quickly when folks understand that. Because I think there is kind of an understanding amongst many Idahoans, maybe we don't like affordable housing. Some people think, we don't want that in our neighborhood or our town. Some people have told me, we're pro housing, but it depends on the type of people that you're bringing into our community. And I think I laugh when I say that, but it's actually kind of sad. There are a lot of myths around the types of people that live in these developments. I'm sure that is a big barrier for you, but maybe talk about some of the challenges creating the types of housing that you're trying to create in Idaho, whether it's NIMBYs, whether it's, regulatory challenges, resources that you lack or whatever it is. Because, as you know, through the Gem State Housing Alliance, those are the types of things we're trying to make easier for you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so multifamily housing shouldn't, is not for everybody everywhere. But I do think it is really important for Idahoans and jurisdictions to really, consider what makes a community thrive. And it oftentimes requires people to, it requires people to have funds to spend on other things besides housing. So because housing is so expensive now, the market just doesn't provide housing for folks for folks that are working, right? For the workforce, in a way that's affordable or attainable. So I guess, yes, I've dealt with a lot of NIMBY issues over my career, and I've learned to sort of navigate around it, meaning I will pick projects or pick communities or identify places to work that I'm not going to have those challenges because it saves me money and provides certainty. And so that in and of itself is like not a great thing for creating more housing overall. I don't know if that makes sense, but I guess what I'm trying to say is like, because I've been doing this for so long, I can identify places, whether it's certain zones or certain communities, or, even like after talking to planners and understanding, how much they know or understand about the need for their workers in their communities when it comes to housing, I can sort of identify like, oh, this is going to be an uphill battle in a way that is, maybe I'll go someplace that it's easier. Right? Because it provides me more certainty and less risk. So yes, that is a way that, although I don't feel like I have had some situations in the past year that are pretty NIMBY heavy, and I can talk about those if you want, but there's certainly like ways that developers will just work around NIMBYs, and that doesn't create the housing that we need.
Right.
Ultimately.
Right.
Then when it comes to regulatory, I have maybe a little bit of a different, I think folks that are doing like more kind of smaller homes on smaller lots, more horizontal development, I would call it, would have a very different answer. And that's not what I do. So I don't know some of those barriers that they face. But one thing that I would just urge anyone like listening or anyone that, has a role in government is the thing that is the most helpful for me is when I walk into a planning office in a community, large or small, and there's somebody who is willing to help me get where I need to be versus somebody who is automatically showing me the barriers. And it's like a distinction that is almost, it's hard for me to explain because it's not somebody that's trying to smooth the path and like make it easy on me or let me remove the rules as much as somebody who understands the rules and is able to explain them to me initially and like help me along the path of like, this is the rule, this is how we address it, this is what is, reasonable, like we want two spaces per unit. This is not something that we're gonna negotiate on, developer, but open space is something that we would negotiate on, right? Or you need 2 drive aisles immediate. Like I'm telling you on this site, you need 2 drive aisles, right? I can plan it from the beginning.
Drive aisles.
Access to the main road or driveways, right? Like,
Got it.
Like, okay, because my architect or my designer might say, oh, we could probably get away with 1. And then we would design this whole building based on having like 1 entrance for cars. And then we go to planning and they're like, nope, we require 2 because of either this portion of the code or this fire requirement, but something that like from the outside looking in could be seen as gray and we went one direction. And there's just certain planners and, certain governments have like a housing ombudsman or a housing project manager where they say, oh, okay, you're doing the kind of housing that we want, whether it's single family home ownership or it's multifamily, deeply affordable, or it's permanent supportive housing for our homeless population, or it's like for first-time home buyers, whatever the situation is, this is the priority that our community wants. And you say that you want to do this. We're going to walk you through the process to help decrease the barriers, but also make sure you're doing what our community wants you to do. right? Like, I want the deed restrictions. I want the deed restrictions for this type of worker or type of family. And that is like, it's a nuance that's really hard to like teach.
Right.
But I've seen it be super, super successful.
So one thing that we've heard through the legislature's housing committee this year is like smaller towns, especially, they have, 5 staff maybe. I mean, is that a challenge? Part of it? Part of it's just an attitude of like, no, what I hear from developers and architects, definitely not to put planners under the bus because we have some amazing planners in our state, but sometimes planners are very detail oriented, let's say.
Yeah.
They're
Totally.
just very literal reading of the code, maybe not willing to kind of work with
Black
developers.
and white, it's real simple.
It's
Yeah.
very like, this is the rule. Even if it doesn't make sense, this is the rule because this is what it says and this is what I think it says. So sometimes we see that type of attitude for sure. But what I've heard also is in smaller communities, planners are just, maybe they don't exist on the city staff necessarily, or they're just really stretched thin because they have a growing city, very small staff. They're not able to really accommodate or work with developers. They don't really have time.
Right. No, it's absolutely capacity. And I do think that planners, the personality that makes a very good planner traditionally is so different on the personality, like strengths or whatever. It's so different than the developer's personality.
Right.
So it's almost like a built-in wrestling match between the two. Like, regardless of what the rules say, just their personalities. They're not personalities that would get along at a
Developers
cocktail.
are creative. You're
Big, like the
big
details
picture.
later, like
Yeah.
details later. And I just want you to say yes. I just like, oh, I heard you say yes somewhere. And the planner's like, I actually didn't say yes. Right. And a really different personality. But it is hard for rural communities in Idaho to create the capacity to know the rules and even understand what their community needs. Mm-hmm. So like having, housing needs assessments so that planners, as they move through the ranks or move out and into the community, right? Like, you lose a planner, they'll be there for a few years, they go on. Mm-hmm. They can have something, whether it's a study or a needs assessment, to look back to and say, right, yes, we did want to allow more opportunity for home ownership, and whether it's manufactured homes or tiny homes or smaller lots, or yes, this was a priority of our community, in this year, and we still think it's a priority, and therefore this project that's coming in 3 years later, when that planner's gone, we can meet these priorities and goals because they've been outlined for us. So that idea of like kind of measuring your community needs and desires, whatever you want to call that. I see them called housing needs assessments a lot, but it's a pretty powerful tool for planning staff. And then it becomes, for good developers, it becomes a powerful tool for us too, because we can study that and say, I do multifamily housing and this community does not prioritize that. So I'm going to find a community that does prioritize or wants it. But another developer might do first-time home ownership, and they might go to that first community that has already stated their priority there.
Right.
So I don't know if that.
Yeah, no.
I don't know if I just like went around and.
That's something that smaller communities don't really have resources to do or apply for funds to do. I think, something I would love to do in the future with Gem State is maybe help smaller communities try to get grants to do housing
those.
needs assessments, right? So they can know what their needs are and, educate their community about it too, not just planners, but say, hey, this is what we need for our local workforce, people who are living and working here. How are we going to get there together?
I love this idea.
Let's do it.
I mean,
yeah,
let's create
it's on
a
the
fund
list
for small communities to prioritize, a housing needs assessment or whatever we want to call it. Maybe that's not the right name, but
if there are local funders watching, we may apply for grants for this in the future.
I love it.
Cities do have comprehensive plans required by LUPA. They're required to do that. So that can kind of help provide the big picture too.
Yep.
But what I've heard is that sometimes you got the big picture in the comprehensive plan, but the zoning code doesn't get updated to reflect those ideals.
Yes.
So there's a conflict, right?
Yes.
And then also sometimes NIMBY folks in the community or city council members don't want to implement those big picture ideas because they're not popular. And so we don't always see comprehensive plans getting implemented. I don't know if that's a big challenge, but
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of the communities that I work, maybe it goes back to that first thing I said where I try to identify communities where it's not as much of an uphill battle. But a lot, I haven't faced that, but I know it exists.
right.
Very much so. And one of the challenges with comprehensive plans is they're super vague because they are so big picture and they're supposed to last for so long. And so the role of zoning in my eyes would be to try to like pare down those big picture ideas in the comp plan and create real places that things can happen. And I don't know the laws of the state well enough to know, but like, you know, pilot programs, one of the things I find is that jurisdictions are really hesitant to say yes to new things. Because A, it might not be popular. B, it might fail, right? I mean, it might fail.
Yeah.
And C, it might set a precedent. So if we say yes to SMR development, we're going to have to say yes to every other random developer, like whether or not they've got the backing or the experience or the know-how. And I think that it's a real fear, and it's true. I mean, that setting precedents is hard. And so I think there's a space for sort of like this idea of piloting a program. Like SMR development, your idea is good. It doesn't fit, but we're gonna allow you to try it if you're so willing. And we're gonna come back, 2 years later, 3 years later, whatever, and decide if it was successful. And if so, we might change the code to allow it. But it in and of itself is not setting a precedent. And in of itself, it is the number one pilot program. And I don't know what the legal nuances of my terminology there is.
Yeah.
But I think there's something there
For sure.
to help jurisdictions do things that are a little out of the box that they don't want to happen everywhere.
And just see what happens.
Just see what happens.
Which normally, if you bring housing development to light, what I've heard from neighborhoods is all the fears that they had don't usually come true. It's like,
it's so true.
yeah, it actually increases your property value, usually density. It creates, more amenities nearby. It increases quality of life for everyone in that area, which I know is hard to grasp, especially with more traffic challenges that people like to complain about in Idaho.
Yeah.
Especially in the Treasure Valley. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's real. Nobody wants more traffic. I mean, nobody, right?
right.
But I think especially if housing is placed in strategic locations that are close to services, I've seen and I've been part of projects that create more bus lines. Right. And that might not be for every community in Idaho. I mean, this is Treasure Valley, but certainly, I mean, if you're up in Grangeville, you've got a lot of services in Grangeville, it's a lot easier for folks to be in Grangeville with maybe one car, a family with one car, if they're located in city limits where they can access the grocery store and the gas station. I mean, there's just services that are there. And it might not feel as hard. It might help the local businesses. Might help Main Street and in ways that you can't even really imagine.
For sure. People don't always realize that. Well, one thing I want to ask you about too is, something on my mind with affordable housing development is how hard it is to do. Like, you can't just go in and say, I'm going to create this 7-story building. And oh my gosh, it is quite the minefield of information and research and paperwork that you have to do. Can you talk a little bit about just some of the challenges specifically with creating affordable housing, capital A, and then also what that capital stack looks like? Because in terms of what I've heard from you and other affordable housing developers, one big challenge is making the project pencil.
Absolutely.
If you're creating, how much is rent on Wilson Station on State Street?
It's anywhere from about $450 to about $2,000.
$2,000, okay.
Depending on family size and income. Remember, that's 30% AMI up to 80% AMI for a 3-bedroom with maybe 4 people.
3-bedroom, yeah. But in Boise, a 3-bedroom, if you're renting, that's going to be $3,000, right? I mean,
market, absolutely.
Yeah, a market, yeah. So,
absolutely.
so
Especially
how do you?
That's close to schools, close to bus, close to grocery.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. Yeah, good location, and not out in Mountain Home or whatever,
Right,
you
right,
know, so,
right.
or wherever. Yeah. So how
No,
do you make it pencil? Yeah, with pushing rents down as you have to.
yeah. So I mean, this is a great question, and I think it is a common idea that like, why can't they just build it without government money?
Right.
They meaning like, why can't affordable housing for my preschool, the gal who teaches preschool for my kid, why can't she just move into like any housing that's out there? Well, he or she can if it's an old, dilapidated, at least in the Treasure Valley, like, kind of a naturally occurring affordable housing unit, which is like older, maybe doesn't have some of the amenities, but like that might work great for them, right? But if you're going to create new housing in today's market, the costs are really high. And that doesn't matter if it's the cost or the cost, whether you're creating housing for somebody at 60% AMI or creating housing for a millionaire. Yes, the rich person has slightly different finishes. They have a larger house, so it's more expensive, but the costs are the cost, right? The structure is the structure, the hookups are the hookups, the fees are the sewer and water hookups are the same cost for a unit is a unit is a unit, affordable or not. So this idea, I mean, there is a gap between the revenues a project can bring in, i.e. the rents, when the rents are serving lower incomes, and what it costs to build and pay off the mortgage and the debt on the property. So that gap is what affordable housing developers and all developers are really trying to minimize. And when you have that gap on a market rate project, you can decrease it by increasing the price of the home or increasing the rent of the home, right? So oops, your water line needs to be increased and it's going to cost an extra $500,000. Okay, I'm just going to raise every unit by $5,000 for sales price or whatever, right? I'm going to cover that gap by raising the price. Well, in affordable housing, you can't do that.
Right.
So you have to get that gap covered elsewhere. And, that comes from the low-income housing tax credit equity is the primary source of funding, but it has a gap, and it's intended to create partnerships to help fill that gap.
Right.
That usually comes from state sources, whether it's state tax credits, which Idaho doesn't have, unfortunately, or other sort of like workforce housing funds, permanent housing funds that I know the state has had for years and doesn't necessarily fund consistently, although it has had some success in funding recently, very much. And I think that would be a really great thing to study. But so state funds and then local funds, right? I mean, the federal government gives participating jurisdictions, which are, sort of larger communities, home and CDBG and other sorts of funds to help address needs for lower income families. And then those areas that aren't called participating jurisdictions, so really, smaller communities, have access to the state's home funds that have been received through the feds. So those are another source of funds, which, whether they're called state funds or federal funds, it's like, who's to decide? They're given to the state through the feds, but they're administered through the state. So, and then there's, local foundations and grants and, opportunities like from the home loan banks to, to serve certain types of certain types of housing that they prioritize and they change every year or change every few years. So there's these capital stacks that are like all these debts, all these different kinds of debt, including bonds, tax-exempt bonds, which are really valuable that the state also allocates, coupled with low-income housing tax credit equity, coupled with other sort of softer funds of home or CDBG, other things that are granted through the state or local governments to help fill that gap. And that's the only way it gets it done. But at the end of the day, I would argue, and I don't know the stats on this, so bear with me, but I would argue that affordable housing, when using a lot of government funds, does cost a little bit more than, say, if I was just going to go build a unit with just my own money. Because you have more lawyers, you've got more bureaucratic forms to sign, you just have more sort of requirements for it to meet the needs. But the costs are still the costs. So there might be a little bit more like soft cost and attorney's fees and bureaucracy fees, whatever we want to call it. But the unit itself is still really high cost. And in today's market, it is just a lot more expensive to build a home than it has been ever in Idaho. And I think that we need to get away from thinking affordable housing is so expensive and think housing is expensive.
Right. No
Right?
matter the type of housing.
No matter the type of housing, but if you're serving the very rich, the very rich can spend an extra $100,000 on their home or whatever because they have they have the good credit, they can mortgage it, they get a better rate, and the working class can't always do that.
Right. Right.
So I don't know if that.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I think to hear about all the things you have to do to piece this thing together. You're like just creating this
And
huge.
each of those sources of funds sorry to interrupt, but each
No.
of those sources of funds, they have their own deadlines and their own, you have to apply on this date, but you don't hear back until this date. And so you have to get all your funders lined up and then they have to pause and then wait. And it's just,
Your fundraising.
it's hard. Yeah. It's constant. And, I always laugh because I have some friends that do market rate housing and they are market rate housers are really generally not interested in doing what I do because it's they're like, I just have to find equity and just go to my Main Street bank and find a loan and I can just do it.
Yeah.
And you have to wait for application deadlines and have to,
Because you can't pass the cost off to the renter.
because you can't increase the rents when you
you
have
can't increase
a
the
contingency that goes up. So,
Right.
whether
it's
oops,
like a-
lumber tariffs existed or, and I don't want to use the word tariff because that's loaded these days, but
Have a challenge with your contractor.
have a challenge with your contractor, have a different, you have a, didn't realize you have a underground storage tank on your site or something
go.
that all this costs $25,000. And that just comes out of contingency. And at some point, I had a project and this wasn't in Idaho, but it was a huge snow year. So we spent a bunch of time moving snow around. I'm sure Blaine County or Coeur d'Alene could.
You're like, how do I pay for this?
How do I pay for this? Well, it comes out of contingency or profit. And, everyone's got to make money to keep their lights on.
Right.
Even affordable housing developers.
Totally. Now, Idaho, you mentioned the Workforce Housing Fund. We have had our Housing Trust Fund in policy since the 90s. The Housing Trust Fund went unfunded it has never been funded still. During the pandemic, though, we had, excess funds, Idaho did. And thankfully, our governor put $50 million towards workforce housing in his budget. We passed, and that we spent that money, the state spent that money in a year, loaning out the funding to developers. It basically allowed, I think it was 18 projects all across the state to pencil, created 1,200 units. But the money is gone now. Yeah. Those are long-term loans. So it's a loan fund. So the money will go back into the fund over the next 20 years or 30 years or whatever the loan term is. But it's going to take time. And in the meantime, there's nothing in there that is going to make a project feasible. It's not enough money. So we tried to get the governor actually put in his budget $15 million again. 15? 15 in January. Didn't pass. The legislature just wasn't willing to do it this year. But, we need some more money in that fund, I guess. One thing, though, that I heard in the legislature is that folks are saying, hey, we don't think we need this money because developers are making a lot of money. And so why can't they pay for the housing? Why do taxpayers have to pay for the housing? Well, I mean, first of all, it's a loan. So you got to pay it back, right?
Yeah.
But how do you respond to that, I guess, as a developer, if people are watching and think you're just padding your pockets over here with this money? I've heard people say, developers just want free money. How do you respond to that? I mean, you did explain it pretty well just now, but can you kind of directly respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, let's be real. Everybody wants free money. Who doesn't want free money, right? But when you're dealing with what I would call deed restricted housing or housing that is purposefully built to serve a certain population that wouldn't otherwise be able to afford, and I don't even mean capital A, I just mean afford 30% of their income to housing, it doesn't always pencil. And more often than not, it doesn't when you're especially working with folks that are less than 100% AMI all over the state. And so I think I would respond by saying, The market doesn't take care of this. The open market doesn't take care of this. There may have been a time when it did because it was less expensive to build or labor was less or regulations were less, but it doesn't pay for itself now. So unless you want rents to be higher and mortgage rates to be higher and unattainable and unaffordable for, you know, a lot of your workers, you have to help those developers stay in business and they do have to make money. And so that's not always what people want to hear,
Right.
but it's not going to happen otherwise. And I think that's what we see in Idaho. It's like if you want to say padding pockets, I'm like, okay, fine. I mean, but what it's really doing is allowing that business to continue because otherwise an affordable housing developer won't build it. And perhaps a market rate developer would build it and it wouldn't serve your teachers and your early cops and your librarians and whoever else you want to serve to keep them in your community. And I mean, this is a little bit abstract, but the number of commercial, like market rate, multifamily builders that are looking at Idaho and elsewhere because their their states have become so difficult to build in, not affordable. I'm talking market rate developers that are saying, I can no longer build in these communities because it's too expensive. I want to build in Idaho. It doesn't necessarily drive costs down, right? I'm just saying, like, when market rate deals aren't working, they'll look to the affordable world to be like, maybe we can make money there. And it's like, oh, that's a big headache. We don't understand that. That's too hard. We can't make money there. We're going to go back to like pause or, you know, whatever we're going to do in our home states. And it's just a roundabout way of saying, like, in order to build the product, people need to the affordable housing product needs a subsidy, otherwise they can't get built. And that's all over the country. And Utah's got credits. Montana, you know, our neighbors. I always look at our neighbors. Like, how do we keep Idahoans in Idaho?
Everybody's
like,
got
I want
this
my
stuff.
kids to stay in Idaho, right? They need a place to live. Doesn't need to be fancy, but they're going to need a place that they can afford. And so, well, Salt Lake has this, or Utah has this, and Montana's got a state fund and some pretty aggressive zoning, I believe, if I understand it correctly.
Yep.
You know, Oregon's got state funds and credits. There's tools that our neighbors have that Idaho doesn't have. And I think that's a really important thing for the legislature and communities to look at to understand what they're doing right and maybe what they're not doing right and learn from it. Because we're going to lose builders, we're going to lose developers, we're going to lose our kids.
Well, you build out of
states.
state. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, would you build more in Idaho if some of this stuff was taken away in terms of the challenges?
In terms of the challenges, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think in Idaho in particular, it's resources. It's that gap funding.
Right. Especially for like capital
What
affordable.
I do. Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
huge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's also just the community understanding what they need and want. You know, I really like our idea of getting smaller communities to do housing needs assessments because I think, you know, you might find some really, the community might find some really surprising things.
Absolutely. I think our communities in Idaho have seen this huge uptick in housing costs just in the last 5 to 6 years. I think I've really seen this. I mean, rents gone up a huge amount. I mean, it's more than doubled for some communities. And so people that were able to live and work here can't anymore. And so I think finally folks are coming around to the idea of like, okay, this isn't working, what we're doing. We need to change something to allow for more housing to get built and housing of different types and sizes and not just, you know, sprawling out our communities.
Yeah.
So how do we do this? What are we not doing that we could? And how can we get help to do that? I think in all of us coming at this question with an aspect of humility is important, right? Because clearly something's not working right now in Idaho. We got to figure that out together. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I love that. And I'm excited to be part of the solution.
Yeah. Well, you're a huge part of the solution. And, you know, like you said, it's about our kids being able to, you know, live here and afford to purchase a home in 10, 20 years. It's about building a future for our young people and making it so they can have that. Well, how much did you say you bought your East End home for?
Yeah, like, I mean, I bought my East End home, and it's a modest home, but you know, for like $250,000, and I just think I could never do that today. And if I was, my 15-year ago self, I would not be able to live in Boise. And I might be able to live in another great community, but I don't know. And I just think if we want people to to continue to thrive, but to continue to build businesses and work on Main Street and have a place to give back to their community and not just like work remotely or I just think it's important that we all have like safe and stable places to live that we feel comfortable, that we're not overspending or overcrowding ourselves into,
Right.
so that we can have the freedom to think and innovate
And be a part of this community. And
be a part.
Live and work in the communities where we, have a home.
Yeah, yeah.
Hopefully.
Totally.
Well, thanks for all you do.
Oh.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have you back on the podcast
Happy to,
eventually.
yeah.
And I learned a lot from you today. Hopefully others did too. But
Good.
go out there and build some more capital A affordable for the rest of your day, hopefully.
Yeah,
And,
and if anybody has any questions or wants to
Yeah.
visit some units and see how how these things come together, I'm happy to speak.
Yeah, cool. They can
speak
reach
with
out
them.
to
They
us and
can.
we'll connect you.
Totally.
All right. Awesome.